Let me be direct with you from the outset, because what happened on the Azerbaijan-Iran border 72 hours ago demands directness. Everyone is focused on the normalization agreement. Everyone is asking whether this represents a diplomatic victory for Tehran or a pragmatic shift by Baku. But that is not the real story. What we are witnessing is not just border reconciliation. It is not just economic cooperation. What we are witnessing is the systematic closure of Israel's primary intelligence corridor into the Iranian interior. And the implications of that closure will reshape Middle Eastern security architecture for the next decade. I am looking at a joint statement released by the Azerbaijani Foreign Ministry and Iran's diplomatic mission in Baku on May 14th, 2026. And I need you to understand what this document actually represents. It is not a standard diplomatic communique. It is not routine border management protocol. What it represents is the formal termination of intelligence sharing arrangements that have existed between Baku and Tel Aviv since 2012. Arrangements that provided Israel with its most valuable asset in monitoring Iran's nuclear program, its ballistic missile development, and its military-industrial complex in the northwest provinces. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly why this border opening is not what it appears to be, why Azerbaijan's pivot away from Israeli intelligence cooperation represents a fundamental recalculation of regional power dynamics, and why this matters to anyone trying to understand where Iran stands today versus where Western intelligence agencies believed it stood 6 months ago. This is the kind of analysis you are not getting from mainstream coverage. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to cover is being actively discussed in closed-door sessions at the Pentagon, Mossad headquarters in Tel Aviv, and the Iranian Supreme National Security Council right now. Let's start with geography and infrastructure, because the Azerbaijan-Iran border is not just any border. This is a 700-kilometer frontier that runs directly adjacent to Iran's most strategically sensitive provinces: East Azerbaijan, Ardabil, and West Azerbaijan. To put that in perspective, these three provinces combined house approximately 40% of Iran's declared nuclear-related facilities, including the Fordow enrichment plant, the Arak heavy water reactor, and multiple centrifuge production sites that Western intelligence has monitored intensively since the 2015 nuclear agreement. The border itself has been functionally closed or restricted since late 2022, following a series of security incidents that Iran attributed to cross-border infiltration operations. According to reporting by the Tehran Times and confirmed by multiple regional security analysts, Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps intelligence documented at least 17 separate incursions between October 2022 and March 2023, including drone surveillance flights, signals intelligence collection operations, and at least 3 attempted physical infiltrations by operatives carrying Israeli-manufactured equipment. Azerbaijan, for its part, has historically maintained what diplomatic observers call a balancing act between Tehran and Tel Aviv. The country imports approximately 40% of its defense equipment from Israel, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. That includes Harop loitering munitions, ELM 2084 radars, and IAI Heron surveillance drones. The intelligence relationship was even deeper. According to former Mossad case officer Ronen Bergman, writing in Yedioth Aharonoth in 2019, Azerbaijan provided Israel with access to airfields, listening posts along the Iranian border, and facilitated agent networks that operated inside Iranian territory. Subscribe if you are watching this and realizing you are not getting this level of analysis anywhere else. Now, let's talk about what actually changed and why the border opening represents something far more significant than diplomatic normalization. Announcement number 1, the intelligence infrastructure is being dismantled. And this one matters more than anything else because it represents the physical removal of Israel's eyes and ears on Iran's northern frontier. According to Defense Security Asia, citing sources within Azerbaijan's state security service, the border opening agreement includes explicit provisions requiring the closure of 3 electronic surveillance stations that Azerbaijan operated jointly with Israeli intelligence services. These facilities, located near the border towns of Astara, Bilisuvar, and Jalilabad, provided real-time signals intelligence on Iranian military communications, tracked vehicle movements on the Tehran-Tabriz highway, and monitored electromagnetic signatures from nuclear facilities up to 150 kilometers inside Iranian territory. The stations themselves were relatively modest in physical footprint. Commander David Holtzman, a former U.S. Navy intelligence officer who has studied Israeli SIGINT capabilities, described them in a 2024 briefing as highly sophisticated but deliberately low-profile installations designed to avoid satellite detection while maximizing collection against high-value targets. These were not massive antenna farms. They were concealed facilities using advanced directional arrays optimized for specific Iranian military and nuclear-related frequencies. Here is why this matters operationally. Israel's assessment of Iranian nuclear breakout time, the period required to produce enough weapons-grade uranium for a single nuclear device, has always depended heavily on real-time monitoring of centrifuge operations at Natanz and Fordo. Without direct access to electromagnetic signatures, and without the ability to correlate those signatures with vehicle traffic, personnel movements, and communication patterns, Israel's confidence in its breakout estimates drops dramatically. Bloomberg reported on May 15th that Israeli defense officials acknowledged privately that the loss of Azerbaijan-based collection will extend their detection lag time from approximately 2 weeks to potentially 2 months. That is the difference between having actionable intelligence for a preemptive strike and discovering a fait accompli after the fact. Received. That is announcement number 1. Announcement number 2, the economic framework is strategically designed to make reversal prohibitively expensive for Azerbaijan. This is the part that most Western analysts are missing entirely. The border opening agreement does not just restore diplomatic relations. It establishes a comprehensive economic integration program worth an estimated $2 billion over 5 years, according to Iran's Ministry of Economic Affairs and Finance. This includes a $8 billion commitment to construct a deep-water port facility on the Caspian coast at Astara, directly linking Azerbaijani freight networks to Iranian transportation infrastructure that connects to the Persian Gulf. Think carefully about what this represents. Azerbaijan is a landlocked nation whose primary export, oil and gas, currently flows through pipelines controlled by or vulnerable to Russian, Turkish, and Georgian interests. The Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline, which carries Azerbaijani crude to Mediterranean markets, crosses Georgian territory and has been subject to periodic shutdowns due to regional instability. The proposed Astara port facility offers Azerbaijan an alternative southern route through Iran to global markets, reducing dependence on northern corridors. Iran is not offering this infrastructure out of generosity. This is a strategic dependency lock. Once Azerbaijan commits $8 billion and 5 years of construction to infrastructure that requires Iranian cooperation to function, the cost of reversing course and reopening intelligence cooperation with Israel becomes economically catastrophic. The port becomes a hostage to the relationship. Stay with me because this is where the narrative completely changes and where the scale of what Iran has accomplished becomes impossible to ignore. Announcement number 3. China is the invisible guarantor of this entire arrangement, and that changes everything about its durability. On May 10th, 4 days before the Azerbaijan-Iran agreement was formally announced, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi made what appeared to be a routine diplomatic visit to Baku. He met with Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev for what official statements described as discussions on bilateral trade and Belt and Road Initiative cooperation. Ati Bezintat Bin Trides. That description was accurate but incomplete. According to reporting by the South China Morning Post, citing diplomatic sources in Beijing, Wang Yi's visit included a confidential briefing session with Azerbaijani security officials, in which China offered a financial guarantee package worth up to $2 billion to backstop Azerbaijan's economic commitments to Iran. Essentially, China agreed to absorb potential losses if the Iran-Azerbaijan economic integration failed to deliver projected returns, removing Azerbaijan's financial risk and making it far easier for Baku to sever ties with Israeli intelligence. Why would China do this? Because China's strategic interest in degrading Israeli intelligence capabilities inside Iran is direct and substantial. Approximately 90% of Iranian oil exports currently flow to China, according to the International Energy Agency. Any Israeli military action against Iranian nuclear facilities predicated on intelligence gathered from Azerbaijan-based stations would immediately disrupt those oil flows, spike global energy prices, and damage Chinese economic stability during a period when Beijing is attempting to navigate trade tensions with the United States. China is not acting as a neutral mediator here. China is acting as a strategic investor in reducing the probability of an Israeli strike on Iran by removing the intelligence foundation that would make such a strike feasible. The $2 billion guarantee is not charity. It is insurance against a regional war that would harm Chinese interests. Received. That is announcement number 3. Now, let's talk about what is really happening behind the headlines, because there are 2 stories playing out simultaneously, and the mainstream media is only covering one of them. The public story is diplomatic reconciliation between 2 neighbors with a complicated history. The actual story is the systematic erosion of Israel's operational capability to monitor and, if necessary, strike Iranian nuclear infrastructure. Israel's strategic calculus on Iran has always rested on 3 pillars: intelligence collection, operational planning, and political will. Of those 3, intelligence is foundational. You cannot strike what you cannot locate precisely. You cannot assess risk if you cannot monitor in real time. Israel's confidence in its ability to conduct a successful strike on Iranian nuclear facilities has always derived from its intelligence picture, and the core of that picture has been Azerbaijan. Consider what Israel has lost in the past 18 months. In late 2024, Iraq formally prohibited the use of its airspace for any military operations targeting Iran, closing what had been a potential northern strike corridor. In February 2025, Turkey publicly stated it would not permit Israeli aircraft to transit Turkish airspace for offensive operations against any regional state, effectively closing the Western approach. In March 2026, Saudi Arabia quietly informed Washington that it would not grant overflight permission for Israeli strikes, closing the southern corridor. Now, in May 2026, Azerbaijan terminates intelligence cooperation and closes the monitoring infrastructure that would provide targeting data for any strike through the remaining eastern approach. Think carefully about what this represents. When Israel's operational corridors close one by one, and when the intelligence infrastructure that enables targeting is systematically dismantled, that is not diplomatic nuance. That is a verdict. Israel's window for unilateral military action against Iran is closing, and it is closing because regional states have made a collective assessment about which side of the Iran-Israel equation represents the greater long-term threat to their interests. The Israeli response has been predictable but strategically impotent. Prime Minister Netanyahu's office released a statement on May 15th describing Azerbaijan's decision as a betrayal of shared security interests and a dangerous concession to Iranian pressure. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant stated publicly that Israel retains all necessary capabilities to defend its security interests regardless of regional diplomatic shifts. These statements are technically accurate, but operationally irrelevant. Retaining capabilities is not the same as retaining the intelligence architecture required to employ those capabilities effectively. If you operate a business with any regional exposure to Middle Eastern energy markets, what is happening between Azerbaijan and Iran is not a diplomatic story. It is a risk assessment story. If you track defense policy or regional security, this is not about one border. It is about the incremental erosion of Israel's freedom of action and the corresponding expansion of Iran's strategic depth. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and every time it repeats, the outcome is the same. The Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta lasted 27 years. Both sides exhausted themselves militarily, economically, and politically. Athens lost its empire. Sparta won the war, but collapsed within a generation from the cost of victory. And who actually won the Peloponnesian War? Macedon. Philip II and his son Alexander inherited a Greek world so weakened by internal conflict that Macedon conquered the entire system with relative ease. The parallel here is not poetic. It is structural. Israel and Iran have been locked in a shadow conflict for over a decade. Both sides have expended enormous resources. Israel has conducted hundreds of airstrikes, cyber operations, and covert actions. Iran has built proxy networks, developed missile capabilities, and advanced its nuclear program incrementally despite sanctions. Both sides are weaker than they were in 2015. And who is winning this conflict? China. So, Beijing is not fighting. Beijing is not sanctioned. Beijing is not conducting airstrikes. Beijing is writing checks, building ports, guaranteeing deals, and systematically reshaping the regional order in ways that advance Chinese interests while Israel and Iran exhaust themselves against each other. The Azerbaijan border opening is not an Iranian victory. It is a Chinese investment. The parallel is exact. Israel is Athens, possessing technological superiority and tactical excellence, but limited strategic depth. Iran is Sparta, less sophisticated, but more resilient and willing to absorb costs over extended timelines. China is Macedon, waiting patiently while both sides weaken themselves and positioning to dominate the post-conflict regional order. So where does this leave us? Let me give you 3 clear paths forward, because there is no honest middle ground here. Path 1, Israel accepts the new strategic reality and pivots toward a containment strategy rather than a preemptive strike strategy. This would require acknowledging that the intelligence and operational conditions for a successful unilateral strike no longer exist. Israel would shift resources towards cyber operations, targeted assassinations of key nuclear scientists, and diplomatic efforts to maintain international sanctions pressure. This path avoids a catastrophic military confrontation, but accepts that Iran will likely achieve threshold nuclear status, the capability to produce a weapon quickly if it chooses without actually crossing that line. The conditions required for this path are significant. Domestic political acceptance in Israel that military action is off the table, continued U.S. security guarantees, and Iranian restraint in actually weaponizing its program. I assess the likelihood of this path at approximately 40%. It is the rational choice, but rational choices are not always politically viable in democracies under threat perception. Path 2, Israel attempts a strike anyway, despite degraded intelligence, using alternative collection methods, including satellite reconnaissance, cyber penetration, and human intelligence from networks inside Iran. This would be a far riskier operation than anything Israel has previously attempted. Without real-time signals intelligence from Azerbaijan targeting confidence drops. Without guaranteed overflight corridors, aircraft survival rates decline. Without certainty about Iranian defensive positions, losses could be substantial. The triggers for this path would be an Iranian decision to enrich uranium to 90% weapons-grade levels, a formal withdrawal from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or intelligence indicating imminent weaponization. The consequences would be severe. Potential Israeli aircraft losses, Iranian retaliation against Israeli cities using Hezbollah rockets and Iranian missiles, regional oil market disruption, and possible U.S. military involvement to prevent Israeli defeat. I assess this path at 35% likelihood. It remains possible if Israeli leadership concludes that accepting Iranian nuclear capability is existentially unacceptable. Path 3, a negotiated framework emerges, brokered by China or another regional power that offers Iran sanctions relief and security guarantees in exchange for verifiable limits on its nuclear program that fall short of weaponization. This would essentially recreate the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, but with different guarantors and different enforcement mechanisms. This path requires U.S. acquiescence, Iranian willingness to accept limits, and credible enforcement that satisfies Israeli security concerns. I assess this at 25% likelihood. It is the most stable, long-term solution, but requires political will from all parties that I do not currently see. I think we are closer to path 1 than the headlines suggest. The systematic closure of Israeli operational options, the economic integration between Azerbaijan and Iran, and China's willingness to backstop that integration all point toward a regional consensus that Israeli military action is unacceptable and must be foreclosed. But path 2 remains possible because Israeli political leadership may conclude that a high-risk strike is preferable to accepting Iranian nuclear threshold status. Here are the questions I want you to take away. First, if Israel's intelligence picture on Iran has degraded as significantly as this analysis suggests, how confident can anyone be in assessments of Iranian breakout time? Second, what happens to regional stability when one actor's military options are systematically removed by collective action from neighboring states? And third, if China is now the primary external guarantor of Iran-Azerbaijan economic integration, what does that tell us about the broader shift in Middle Eastern power dynamics away from Washington and toward Beijing? Tell me in the comments what you think Israel does next. Tell me if you believe China's role in this agreement represents a permanent shift in regional alignment or a temporary opportunistic move. Saumbar de Tensawai. We will keep tracking every development along the Iran-Azerbaijan border, Israel's strategic options, and China's expanding influence in the Middle East. That is what this channel does every single day. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is trying to understand the real dynamics reshaping Middle Eastern security. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next breakdown, and we will see you in the next analysis.